Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar of our EdiSitNet series of lunch talks. I'm happy to have here with us our colleagues from the University of Heidelberg, Michael Eichinger and Kerstin Bonert, and my colleague Leonardo Ramirez. Today we would like to exchange with you ideas and thoughts and evidence and knowledge on biodiversity-friendly and healthy community gardens. But at some very first slides on EdiSitNet, which is like the frame of this lunch talk series. So some of you already know, but there are always some new people. So EdiSitNet is a project funded by the European Commission, and as you can see with this many logos there are many organizations involved from different types, from municipalities to small and medium enterprises to urban food initiatives around the world, some universities and other types of organizations and NGOs as well. Well, what is our mission? We want to promote and anchor edible city solutions because they are overcoming the mismatch between nature-based solutions and citizens by deepening the social dimension of cities, of our urban living. In our team, we see this co-creation of edible city solutions as really an important part to make our cities socially inclusive, invite citizens to co-create the sustainable development of their own society, proactively change their environment, but also their lifestyles. And we do this in a project with co-creation processes in communities of knowledge and practice. What are finally edible city solutions? We understand, we use this term to describe a wide range of different forms of urban farming, food production, distribution, and consumption. One of these forms are the community gardens. We combine these solutions with closed loop systems, sustainable water, nutrient, and waste management, and of course also these are measures to enhance urban biodiversity and health, and both aspects will be in the focus of the lunch talk today. So you can see in the triangle of the sustainability, we have impacts on the environmental side regarding biodiversity, but also on the social cultural side regarding public health aspects, but also on economic on the economic side of with reduced health costs as an example. Well, biodiversity is important because biodiversity supports a lot of ecosystem services, which also support health. Biodiversity makes happy, which is part of health, of course. Biodiversity supports public and planetary health. We will talk about later a bit, but I guess you are already convinced about this. And it is really important to support biodiversity where people are living and working, where they come in touch with nature and with biodiversity. And of course, also biodiversity is attractive. We in general distinguish between actual and perceived biodiversity. The actual biodiversity is mainly measured by the tools of ecological research. Meanwhile, the perceived biodiversity is measured by survey, by participatory observations, etc. And what we would like to share today are some inputs from a new project which works on healthy and biodiversity, biodiverse edible community gardens and edible cities in this term. And yeah, some of these tests or first pilots are also related to the living labs of EdiSitNet in Berlin. So there are some nice overlaps. And of course, there will be also input for our toolbox and for the master plans. For those of you that haven't joined our network, please join the network. And now I would like to hand over the floor to Michael to start with the presentation of the talk.
Hi everyone, pleasure to be here with you this afternoon or this midday, and to talk about this new project. I will quickly share my screen. Just bear with me for a second. Yeah, what do we want to discuss with you today? We have brought some initial ideas of a concept phase we are currently conducting, funded by the Federal Ministry of Education and Research in Germany. And there we look into biodiversity-focused community gardens and their effects on causal effects on public health. And the study is called HEBEDI. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be with you today here. What are the objectives of today's lunch talk? First, we would like to give you a brief overview of the proposed HEBEDI study. In a second step, we would like to share with you some initial results of a systematic literature search to discuss possible endpoints for this study. And there we would be really happy to get your guidance, your input, your feedback on potential endpoints. Things we shouldn't forget about. In the next step, we would like to gather feedback and to get your insights on modules for the gardening concept Ina has already touched upon, which is currently being developed. Then we will talk a little bit about strategies to promote biodiversity in community gardens and discuss those issues and the selection of endpoints I have already touched upon before. Yeah, in the last couple of minutes of today's lunch talk, we will briefly summarize some potential next steps in the HEBEDI study to just give you a bit more of an solid grounding of what we are doing, what we are planning to do during the next couple of months. But let's first start with a brief overview of the proposed study. The HEBEDI consortium currently consists of two main partners. One is Heidelberg University in Germany, and they're the Center for Preventive Medicine and Digital Health, and the Working Group for Climate Crisis and Health. And on the other side, Humboldt-Universität of Berlin with its Integrative Research Institute on Transformations of Human Environment Systems. Just as a background, most of you are quite familiar with community gardens, but maybe for those that are new to the field, we have brought with us one definition that's commonly used and that we are working with in this project. So for us, as a working definition, community garden is an area of land that's used as a garden, which is open to the public and that is cultivated collectively by different people or by a specific group of people. Could be gardens in hospital grounds, gardens on community patches of land of cities or municipalities, but also could be gardens next to nursing or senior citizens' homes. All these would be considered community gardens within the HEBEDI study. Maybe just a quick detour to the literature, the background information, what we already know and things we don't know currently. We are quite sure that species-rich community gardens provide important ecosystem services that are relevant for public health. Some of those are regulation of microclimate. They have the potential to improve the quality of air locally. And they also provide contact with nature, an important aspect when it comes to the promotion of mental health specifically. And we think that they potentially reduce health risks. There's some initial evidence from observational studies, but we are not really sure whether that's a causal effect. And looking at these causal effects is one of the main things we want to achieve in the HEBEDI project. What we currently don't know is we have little evidence on the causal effects of biodiversity on health. That's something I've already touched upon. And especially in the context of community gardens, we don't know a lot about the underlying mechanisms. So how are the mechanisms that lead to health effects when it comes to biodiversity exposure? And a second important aspect is that we are currently struggling with implementing community gardens in urban and suburban areas globally. That's also something we want to focus on in this project. Just to give you a brief overview, what are the objectives of the HEBEDI study? We aim to generate evidence for the causal effects of biodiversity on health and well-being in the context of community gardens. Here we look at health and well-being, so we envision a broad concept of health. It's not only physical health, but also social health, mental health, and also the wider concept of well-being. And a second core aim of the project is to provide evidence on how to implement community gardens in different types of urban and suburban areas, and how to mainstream this nature-based solution within municipal planning processes. So we have a research-oriented aim to look at the causal effects, and we have a second side of the project, a second part, that's pretty much focused on implementation research and how we can succeed in mainstreaming those ideas in planning processes. What do we plan in the HEBEDI project? We plan to do a cluster randomized controlled trial. For those of you that might not be that familiar with this study design, we will identify areas suitable for implementing community gardens, then randomly assign those areas to two study groups. One is the intervention group, where we will implement species-rich community gardens. In the control group, we implement standard community gardens that don't have a focus on biodiversity promotion. Then we normally do a baseline survey, a baseline assessment, gathering data on our primary and secondary endpoints. After that, we implement the two types of gardens on the patches of land. And then we normally do two follow-up surveys, one after roughly 10 to 12 months, and the second one after approximately 2 years, looking at the same endpoints at every point in time. And this would be the strategy to identify the causal effects of biodiversity exposure on health, because we are able to compare these two groups, the species-rich community gardens with the standard community gardens. What are the participants we aim to recruit? It's adults aged 18 years and older without any further exclusion or inclusion criteria in order to maximize external validity. And then we look at a series of potential endpoints, and that's something I will discuss on the next slide. But before doing so, maybe I just briefly give you a bit of further background information on the concept phase. We are currently working on the concept for the full proposal, which will be handed in at the end of November. And then we will carry out our formative research until next June. And hopefully, if we get funding for the implementation phase, we'll start implementing gardens in the second half of 2024. So that's to give you a brief overview of where we are currently situated in the concept phase. So we are heavily working on the full proposal right now. Within the concept phase, we have conducted a systematic literature research looking at potential endpoints we might assess in the HEBEDI project. And on this slide, I would like to briefly give you an overview of some important insights we have gained from this literature search. On the left-hand side, we have as input the community garden intervention, consisting of active gardening and growing food, but also for some interventions, educational components that are part of the community garden interventions. And in what follows, we look at potential endpoints that we have clustered according to certain aspects. So when we look at outcomes, we're interested both in short-term and medium to long-term outcomes. Short-term on the left side, medium to long-term outcomes on the right side. And we are both interested in looking into individual endpoints, but also endpoints that are more pertinent to communities or the society level. Just to give you a brief overview about endpoints that have been considered in the context of community gardens as potentially being important endpoints. It's on the one hand, it's the domain of knowledge and attitudes. It's about nutrition knowledge, for example, or environmental awareness. Then we have aspects of mental health, for example, stress and anxiety as two key endpoints of potential key endpoints when looking at the effects of biodiversity. Maybe I just put it that way. I will stick to the blue part first. A second aspect is competencies. These are personal competencies, but also gardening competencies, which would be one part of behavioral competencies. Then we have central health-related behaviors that might be important. It's about fruit and vegetable intake, for example, but also physical activity that's associated with gardening. Mental health we have already covered. Then we have the domain of physical health, for example, healthy weight gain or weight stabilization. When we talk about adults, it's about the body mass index, for example. But then we would also be interested in looking at the wider concept of well-being. There we talk about health-related quality of life, for example, or life satisfaction. Then we quickly move on to the community and society level. Here we are particularly interested in aspects of social health. Two prime examples are social networks that might be forming as a result of establishing a community garden, or for example, social cohesion within the neighborhood. Then we have aspects of social justice that are relevant in the area of community gardening. Here we talk, for example, about food security or access to healthy foods. And then as a penultimate domain, we have community engagement, for example, civic engagement that might come along with starting to garden in a community garden. And then last but not least, we have aspects of biodiversity and ecological sustainability, for example, the aspects of sustainable urban development or different habitats that might be influenced by community gardens. This is a brief overview of potentially important outcomes when it comes to biodiversity-focused community gardens. And in a last step, we also looked into potential barriers and enabling contextual factors. This is more about assessing the causal effects of biodiversity, the green part, and the gray part at the bottom is more about getting insights into how to potentially scale up and speed up implementation of biodiversity-focused community gardens. And here again, we look at different levels. We look at the individual level, the community, and also the society level. At the individual level, aspects that are normally relevant when it comes to nature-based solutions are socio-demographic characteristics of participants, and also those that are not able to or not willing to participate. These includes age, sex, socioeconomic status, for example, but also aspects of communities might be relevant when implementing community gardens. This might be about organizational structure or culture of stakeholders, for example, local communities or education and health institutions. Next to those organizational structures and cultural aspects, we might also be interested in environmental conditions of the surrounding of such gardens, for example, soil health. And last but not least, something that we are keen on integrating into the project, at least as a niche topic, is the political and legal environment. So what are the macro level factors, frameworks that might be necessary to scale up nature-based solutions such as community gardens? I think that's it from my side, and I would like to hand over to Ina.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Yeah, I will give some brief insights about the biodiversity part of the study. We will assess biodiversity and will also analyze the topic of environmental injustice or justice at 3 different levels. One, the garden level is obvious, but we also want to look on the surroundings and on the neighborhood level. And here you can see on the figure taken, the living lab of Edison in the cemetery in Berlin, Neukölln. You can see the different types of community gardens working in soil or in these rice beds. Then the cemetery would be something like the surroundings, the immediate surroundings of the garden. And then we also look on neighborhood level, which would be in case of this living lab would be also other green structures nearby, street trees, other important urban and infrastructures. In general, we look for gardens, or we analyze gardens that are in biodiversity-rich neighborhoods, and want to contrast this also to neighborhoods that are not rich in biodiversity. And we will look on gardens with biodiversity enhancing interventions, and on gardens which have not these interventions. On the biodiversity assessment will be done at neighborhood level by looking on habitat biodiversity and habitat connectivity. So fragmentation of the urban matrix is important in this case. We will look on the provision of ecosystem service, at least on health relevant ecosystem services, such as cooling, air filtering, etc. And we will look also on the perception of biodiversity and ecosystem service provision. At garden level and in the surroundings, we will take a multi-taxon approach of species. This means that we look on different target species regarding the richness of these species, like birds, insects, and plants, at least. We will also look at how biodiversity interventions are shaping these. Next slide. Yes, and important what was already mentioned is that we have already developed a modular concept for biodiversity-friendly and healthy community gardens, where we already collected evidence from literature and from practical guidelines, from different knowledge regimes, let's say, also from very practical knowledge. So here also we would like to ask you if you could add your experience regarding this. Some of these biodiversity enriching interventions could be, for example, the use of old orchid species, promoting rich structures, including more water elements like ponds, like swales, like rain gardens. Also include brownfields, classical brownfields, into the garden structure and the surroundings, using elements like deadwoods or what we call animal-aided designs, something like insect hotels, etc. And of course, meadows are important, using old varieties, not only regarding agro-diversity, but also maybe use more regional woody species and woody species with local origins. Of course, also all the aspects regarding management, disturbance, succession, dynamics in the gardens are important elements which go more in direction of management and connecting, of course, the garden with the surroundings, and see the garden as a part of the whole urban mosaic. Next slide, please. Yes, so there are some standard garden elements, the gray ones, which are also nice, but we wanted to make you visually a bit the contrast. So, you know, the garden beds, the beds in the ground, edible plants, shrubs and hedges, etc., composting sites, some ornamental plants. So there are a lot of elements that are normally in the garden, but there are these additional elements that should be enhanced and implemented to make the garden more biodiverse. And based on these elements, we did also literature research and looked on the current state of the art of the knowledge, and some of them are good analyzed. There are a lot of knowledge in literature and evidence on their functioning regarding biodiversity and their enriching potential, but there are also some that are not yet well analyzed and investigated. Some of them we tried to cluster these different elements. What you can see in the green table, there are these building attached elements, there are woody elements, water-related elements, brownfield-related elements. These are differentiated from herb and grass-dominated elements. The animal-aided design as an extra type of element, then substrate-related elements, connecting elements, and the agrobiodiversity elements. And of course, there are much more that we could discuss also in the exchange with you. Here's some impressions what we mean by this. You can see these different elements, and we would like to discuss with you more in detail if there are some elements missing, or maybe you have other ideas what could be included in as an enriching element. And maybe you have also, as we have seen already in the chat, some more hints and tips on literature. We know that here we have a lot of people from all around the world, so it would be really also helpful if you have some local literature and different languages. We would like to also explore this knowledge and include this in the project. Next slide, please. What we did so far is that we checked what knowledge we have, what habitat service means biodiversity fostering services have different elements in the gardens, and there's a lot of literature. Here you can see a table. You don't need to read it totally in detail, but you can stop then maybe the recording and have a look on it. We are working currently on a publication on this. So there are really a lot of function as habitat, as refugee, as shelter, as nesting site, as a stepping stone between different patches of the urban matrix, but also as a food source. And we identify drivers and pressures for biodiversity regarding these elements, which means there can be also negative impacts on biodiversity, as you could imagine, for example, that some very fragmented and isolated urban infrastructure elements could also be a trap for species and not a source. So we are evaluating the knowledge regarding this to develop at the end for every element options for planning, design, and management that can be helpful in implementing these elements. This is here the example for the building attached biodiversity elements. So these are, for example, green facades, edible green facades, of course. So means orchards, green roofs, of course, our roof gardens are important, but also green walls as an example for building attached parts. The next slide shows an example from the herbs and grass-dominated biodiversity elements. Here we think in dry and fat meadows, or in insect or pollinator-friendly meadows. So there you can see the same. We evaluate always the literature and the evidence regarding the habitat service, the impact on biodiversity, on which species groups, etc., and analyze then potential drivers and pressures, and underlying this with the current state of the art of knowledge. And of course, we include options for planning and design and management, like here, important is the mowing frequency, and also which species are used, or how these elements are enriched by introducing species, etc. Next slide, please. Yes, another one which is really rarely used in gardens, in community gardens, but really we have a lot of knowledge about their really importance for biodiversity, which are the water-related elements like ponds, like open water tanks, like swales and rain gardens. And there's really a lot of knowledge also not only on the functioning to foster habitat services, but also on planning options and integrating this in the overall planning. And this leads me a bit to my, I guess, next slide, which is, no, it was at the beginning, Micha, I did it the other way around, about the strategies. Sorry for this, my mistake. No, the slide on the strategy, I guess it's at the beginning. Well, yeah, sorry. Yes, this one. No, the other, yeah. Well, it's really important to what already was mentioned by Michael. We want to integrate also the community gardens in local biodiversity strategies. Actually, the example of Berlin shows there are already the urban gardens are part of the biodiversity strategy. They are mentioned, as you can see on the right side, but we want to try to support a bit the mainstreaming and the concrete actions in really practical guidelines as well for gardeners. So the idea is to come from think global to garden local in this sense. As the idea is really to work together with local actors, not only the gardeners, also the other stakeholders that are important, like housing companies, to come up in the project also with very practical guidelines that can be also part of the toolbox and could be helpful for gardeners in general. So maybe now we jump back to the next slide. Yes, and we come to the session where we would like to interact more with you. And I hand it over to Misha regarding our questions and yeah, that we would like to discuss with you. And Eddie, I would ask you later to make the moderation maybe in the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Ina, for your input. We have brought some initial guiding questions for you to kickstart the discussion, but we're quite happy to discuss any aspects that might come to your mind. So don't feel limited by those questions. They should just be seen as maybe it's just a first step to get you guys thinking. We would be particularly interested whether you had feedback on the biodiversity modules Ina just presented. Maybe there are some modules missing, maybe some of the modules should be modified, etc. In terms of biodiversity, we would also be interested in whether you had any theoretical or practical background information that might be interesting when implementing those garden concepts. In terms of outcomes, that was the logic model, this framework I have presented a couple of minutes ago. We would be quite interested whether from your practical or scientific experience, there might be other potentially important endpoints, outcomes that we might look into, both in terms of biodiversity outcomes and health outcomes. Health defined in a very broad way, also encompassing well-being dimensions, for example. And within the project, we try to distinguish between short-term and long-term outcomes. So you would also be invited to think along the temporal dimension. And maybe just one last aspect for you to think about are further aspects that might support the implementation and mainstreaming of community gardens in urban or suburban areas. Whether there are any practical experiences you have from your background, from your field of work, from your country. I think this might be some initial aspects to think and discuss about, but just as said before, don't feel limited by that, and we're happy to discuss any aspects that might come to your mind connected with community gardens. And at this point, I would stop sharing my screen and hand over to Eddie.